Psilocybin doesn't create an experience. It removes the filter you didn't know was running. In the most rigorous controlled study conducted at Johns Hopkins, 61% of participants given psilocybin reported a complete mystical type experience. 14 months later, 2/3 still rated it among the most personally meaningful events of their lives, above marriages, above losses, above anything they had previously experienced. The problem nobody warned them about was what happens the following Monday, when the world looks exactly the same, but you no longer do. The dominant cultural narrative about psychedelics is the experience itself, the visuals, the dissolution, the moment of contact with something vast. What gets almost no attention is the week after, when the laundry still needs doing, and the same colleague still sends the same passive-aggressive emails, and the same old anxiety resurfaces at 3 in the morning. Researchers studying post-psychedelic integration describe a window they call the critical period, typically spanning 2 to 8 weeks after a session, during which the brain's default mode network is measurably more plastic than baseline. During that window, the quality of what you do with your time matters more than usual, but most people spend it watching television, because nobody built an infrastructure around the morning after the failure mode. Is not that the insight was false. The failure mode is that insight alone does not reorganize a life, and the friction of daily existence reasserts itself faster than most people expect. The moment it clicks is not a dramatic reconversion, it is the quiet recognition that the practice is here, in this exact disagreeable moment, not in the memory of the session. The pre-modern traditions that used plant medicines were not naive about the integration problem. The Mazatec healer, Maria Sabina, whose ceremonial healing sessions with psilocybin mushrooms were documented in the 1950s by Gordon Wesson, operated within a framework where the session itself was the smallest part of the practice. The preparation, the ceremonial container, the relationship between healer and participant, and most importantly, the structured community into which the participant returned. These were the mechanism. Shamanic cultures treated the visionary state as diagnostic, not therapeutic, the equivalent of surgery, not the cure. The cure was the integration of the diagnostic into the ongoing life of the person within their community. What contemporary use extracted was the mushroom and the experience. What it left behind was every structural element that made the experience legible and useful. The result is people having genuine insights with no framework for what to do with them, cycling through sessions, hoping the next one will resolve what the last one revealed, which is the exact opposite of how the original practitioners designed the use. The experience of radical clarity during a psilocybin session is not a metaphor. Robin Carhart Harris at the University of California, San Francisco has documented, using functional brain imaging, that psilocybin dramatically reduces activity in the default mode network, the region responsible for the continuous self-referential narrative that most humans experience as the background hum of the mind. What receives almost no attention is the other side of that equation. While a default mode network quiets, the theory of mind network, the set of regions responsible for modeling other people's inner states, shows measurably increased activation. The sense of connection to others that people report is not a feeling. It is a measurable shift in which regions of the brain are processing information, and with what priority. Temporarily suspending the self-model does not erase the underlying pattern. Carhart Harris's team found that the default mode network typically reserts itself within hours and often returns stronger than baseline during the rebound period. The insight was genuine, but the cognitive machinery that needs to carry it forward is the same machinery that generated the original patterns, and that machinery does not automatically update. The most honest practitioners in the field describe a version of the same limit, and it is not about safety or dosage. The experience can make the structure of suffering visible in a way that years of ordinary awareness cannot, but it cannot tell you what to do with what you see. In a 25-year follow-up to Walter Pahnke's original Harvard psilocybin experiment, every participant who had received the drug reported that the experience still felt genuinely mystical and remained among the high points of their spiritual life. The sessions were real. The insight was real. What the follow-up could not measure was what they had actually done with it in the intervening decades. The deepest question the experience surfaces is not what is real, which is the question most people think they are asking. The deepest question is this: who is the observer? And does that observer persist when the normal state returns? Every serious contemplative tradition has mapped this question, and every one of them arrived at the same provisional answer. The observer does not have the fixed, stable structure that ordinary experience assumes, and discovering that absence is the beginning of the inquiry, not the resolution of that question. The specific trap that catches experienced practitioners is not ego death, which sounds dramatic and is usually just uncomfortable. The specific trap is what happens in the weeks after a significant experience, when the ego reassembles itself around the memory of the dissolution. The practitioner who has genuinely glimpsed the constructed nature of the self is now in possession of a narrative about having glimpsed the constructed nature of the self, and that narrative is itself an ego position, often a more rigid one than the one that preceded the session. The Tibetan contemplative tradition calls this experience grasping, and identifies it as one of the subtler obstacles on the path, precisely because it mimics progress while reproducing the original problem at a higher level of abstraction. The psychedelic context has no name for this dynamic, which means it goes unrecognized. People who have had 12 sessions and speak fluently about ego dissolution are frequently describing a very sophisticated form of the thing they believe they have left behind. The marker that distinguishes genuine integration from sophisticated ego construction is not the quality of the language, but the quality of the relationships, which do not lie. 14 months after a single session, Johns Hopkins researchers found that the personality trait of openness had measurably increased and stayed that way. Personality traits almost never change in adults. Almost a third of participants rated it the most significant experience of their entire life. Not a wedding, not a loss, that one. The cost of that kind of opening is not dramatic, it is quiet. You simply stop being the center of every story you tell.